androids dream of electric sheep? Do you understand what I mean when I say that? We'll find out in a minute. Hello, welcome to the Christy Grace Scarlet Pen channel. I am an author, creativity chaser, and book lover. Today I'm starting something so exciting. I'm starting a series which I am calling Book versus Movie. Battling it out, duel. We're dueling, battling it out for success. Which was better? What elements worked better for what? The book or the movie? And if you didn't already know, the title of the book that I just mentioned before is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? If you have ever seen that movie, raise your hand. I did recently for the Classic Collection Part 3 and realized it was actually a book. And the movie was called Blade Runner, but it was made in 1982 and had Harrison Ford in the main role playing Deckard, which was the cop, or in the movie he was an ex-cop, whose job it was to hunt down human-looking androids or robots that was so realistic looking that you actually couldn't tell unless you did a special test. And because people over the world had colonized in other planets, in other places, these androids and robots weren't actually allowed on Earth anymore, so you had to track them down, chase them down, and retire or kill these androids because it was illegal for them to be here. So that was his job, to do that. And yeah, yeah. I have a lot of thoughts, I'm not gonna lie. Book versus movie. So the book came out in, I think, 1960 something, 63 maybe? And then the movie was made in the 80s. It's actually rather difficult to get access to the book at all. I did manage to find it at my library and I borrowed it. I watched the movie first. Look, the movie was made in the 80s, right? So it was limited technology and there was limits with what they could do and how they could approach things and show them to us and whatever. Like the technology we have now for special effects, like in the Avengers, like it's phenomenal compared to like the 80s. The plot, the concept, the idea was so interesting. I really liked that idea. In the movie, there were a lot of things that didn't make sense. There were a lot of things that weren't explained. Why is that a big deal? Why is that a problem? What is going on in this world in regards to this or that? And those things only made sense when you read the book. Some of those things that they referenced, that they talked about, that they didn't fully explain, only made sense if you read the book. That's not how it should work. If you're making a movie from a book, from a story that is in written form, you need to be able to explain everything in that film for people who are only watching the film. You can't assume those people have all read the book. You can't assume those people are all gonna go and read the book to get those gaps filled in. You just can't. There were several elements, and I'm gonna talk about them. So spoiler alert if you haven't watched Blade Runner or read the book, but I feel like at this point in 2021, if you haven't watched a 1982 movie or read a book that came out in the 60s, it's pretty much on you. So one element that they talked about, there was a lot of world history that they didn't discuss in the movie that was in the book. What the heck happened to the world? Why is the world they're living in look the way it does now? What happened? Like the book went into, there was a war, there was colonization on other planets, and only some people are left behind. There was supposed to be radioactive dust everywhere, which is why it wasn't super inhabitable, or like why it was so dark and dull and dingy. And there was explanations in the book. There wasn't in the movie. There was literally no explanation whatsoever as to why the world was the way it was. Even a small sentence would have been enough to be like, oh, there was a big war and whatever, and that's why we're living in this situation. There wasn't. It was just, this is how the world is now, deal with it. I will say really quickly though, if you are considering to go and read the book and watch the movie, the book was, I read a reprint, and so there was someone who in the front of the book wrote a little introduction just to warn people who maybe had seen the film and were expecting that in the book, that there was a lot of internal monologue of moral problems or issues, like deep moral issues, and there was pages and pages. Like it wasn't a super long book, but there was pages of deep introspection of like, why do I feel this way? Why is my life like that? Why am I feeling like, why is this happening to me? Why is that the way it is in the world? Am I a mean, horrible person? There was a lot of self-discovery, and those parts could be a little dry, but majority of the book was just a normal story and you could follow along with it. And once you sort of got to know the characters, it was very character driven. Once you got to know the characters and the author was satisfied that you knew them well enough, then he just sort of mostly moved on and then just, you know, got into the story. So the first bit is a bit of a hurdle to get over if you're reading that book. Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is a very long title. And that's probably why they changed it in the movie. So there was a lot in this movie that wasn't explained. Things like why an artificial owl was created in the first place. They didn't explain that. They didn't explain, like in the book they explained things like half of the animals in the world were extinct. They died in this big, you know, natural world war, whatever. Like, animals died. Owls completely are extinct. There aren't any anymore. And that's why it was such an amazing thing to see one and why it was electronic. The movie didn't even address why it was so important that they were animals. The book talked so much more about these animals and why it was important, and the fact that everyone was supposed to have one because it showed empathy, I suppose. It showed that you were a human. So there was a really big distinction between the androids and the humans, which was that androids or the robots couldn't actually show empathy, which is what the test was supposed to show. Lots of that wasn't explained, and also lots of it wasn't explored. There were some really cool scenes written in this book which could have looked amazing on film. They weren't included. I was genuinely surprised. The entire ending also in the movie is different than the book. Completely different in the book to the movie. The characters as well it was frustrating in these characters. It almost felt like Blade Runner tried to say, what would happen if Deckard decided to retire, then come back, but all the characters, not all the characters, but a lot of the characters are still named the same, but it's supposed to be different. Or it happened in a completely different time set. In the book, he was still a cop slash bounty hunter. He wasn't X. It was his job to do that. In the book, the android that he met and you know, was attracted to, it was so different. The ending was different. The characters' resolutions were different. The amount of androids was different. The way he took them down was different. The way that he found them was different. Some of these character personalities were different. The two main characters in the book was Deckard and JR. One main character in the movie was Deckard. JR had a very small role, and it was so different to the book. In the book, he didn't create his own android friends to hang out with. Yes, there was one person per giant apartment block who lived in it, so that part was accurate. He lived there all by himself, but it was because not many people lived where he lived, and there was different reasons as to why. They never explained why he lived on his own in this giant apartment block just by himself. They never explained that in the movie. They did in the book. In the book, they also explained some people, because of the radiation and all of the fallouts of this world war or whatever, there were some people who were affected by the radiation, and that meant that they weren't necessarily as intellectually smart as we are now, and so they had really mean terms for them. They called them chicken heads because they weren't as smart as, you know, the ordinary people or whatever. They didn't sort of delve into the character of JR properly in the film. They could have done a lot with him. He was a main character in the book. Like, he was a big, main, proper, important character. There was lots of elements that they just didn't explore, they just didn't include, and they ran their own way with it. They took 2 or 3 basic ideas and completely changed a lot of it. And I think that was for the poorer, not for the better. I think that they would have had a much more interesting story if they'd properly have picked out the right elements in the book, and I don't understand why some of it was changed. Some elements I understand why. If Deckard was going to fall in love with an android or want to be with an android or sleep with an android, which he did in both. In the book, he was married. In the movie, he wasn't. His wife wasn't around. So whether she died or whether she was the person in those photographs on his piano when he was really sad, we'll never know, because they never actually explained who that person was. It was raining so hard. In the book, there was also this huge moral dilemma. well, they explored it a little in the movie. These androids, they look human. They act human. It still feels like you're killing a human. And so is killing even an android that looks organic, that looks human, is that really something that you're going to feel okay with at the end of the day? And there was a huge element in the book, which they didn't include in the movie, which I can understand why, which was this idea of this empathy box, where it was sort of almost like virtual reality, but hallucinogen virtual reality, where if you touched this empathy box, and you would be connected instantly with other people who were already connected, you all became this one person. So you were this one guy. This is hard to explain. There was a guy called Mercer who was walking up a hill and getting rocks thrown at him, and the idea of becoming that person, but also with everyone else in your mind at the same time, you felt like you weren't alone because you were all together on this struggle and on this journey, and that you were all, you know, you could see and understand how you haven't got it so bad. There was this really big exploration of loneliness in the book, of what it means to be alone and to feel lonely and to feel empty, because most of the world wasn't actually populated at this point because it couldn't be inhabited. There was such horrible sandstorms and radioactive stuff happening that you couldn't actually really inhabit a lot of the world, and so there was a lot of loneliness and isolation, which is relevant for what we're feeling right now. It was just not explored. It was sad, but it was beautifully written. And I will say this, he's very wordy. It felt very, what's that phrase? It felt like literature, not just like a fiction novel. It was so eloquently written and worded. Okay, final thoughts. Book versus movie. Do androids dream of electric sheep? Which incidentally, if you read the book, makes a lot of sense. Or Blade Runner, the movie in 1982. The winner for me is the book. Was so much better than the film Blade Runner. Blade Runner had gaps that were never explained. It had weird connections that I don't understand why they chose that instead of other elements. Do you agree with my thoughts? Do you think the book is better than the movie for Blade Runner? And do robots dream of electric sheep? Or have you only watched the movie? Let me know in the comments any of those things or any thoughts in regards to Blade Runner or the book versus movie. If you can think of any other book versus movies that you would like me to review and let you know my thoughts on, let me know what they are in the comments below. There are so many movies that are actually from books, it would blow your mind whole. So I'm going to be doing a whole bunch of them because why not? I love movies, I love books. If you like this video, like and subscribe, hit that notification bell so that you can be told of when I release a new video and potentially another book versus movie video as well. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the adventures.